Big Shaq thought he was helping the community until a shady car dealer used his name to scam families. One forged photo, dozens of victims, and a trust broken wide open. What started as quiet concern turned into a mission for justice. This isn't just payback, it's personal. Big Shaq gets revenge on the scam that stole more than money. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It started like most of his mornings did lately. Quiet, no alarms, just sunlight slipping between the shutters of a modest house on Ashford Lane. You'd think Big Shaq would be waking up in some marble palace, some LA mansion perched high above traffic and trouble. But no, it was tucked in an Atlanta neighborhood, where kids still rode bikes without helmets, and old men still yelled at pigeons like they owed rent. Shaq didn't live here anymore, not really, but his mama did, and on days when the world didn't ask much from him, he came back here to water her plants, wave at Miss Florence next door, and maybe just maybe, remember what peace used to feel like before fame turned his name into currency. That morning, he was sipping his second coffee, black, no sugar, when he noticed the beat-up red Buick stalled halfway down the street. Hood up, smoke curling like a bad omen. A young guy stood beside it, hands on his head, looking lost in all the ways someone can be. No call for help, no panic, just resignation. Shaq watched for a moment. Then he stood, grabbed a rag from the kitchen drawer, and strolled down like he had all the time in the world. "You all right, big fella?" he asked, voice low and familiar. The man, mid-20s maybe, looked up and blinked. You could see the realization hit him. Not just recognition, but confusion. The kind that asks, why is a millionaire standing on my curb in sweats and flip-flops? Shaq laughed, like he knew what the guy was thinking. Engine overheating? Pop the cap slow, or you'll catch a steam burn you won't forget. The man hesitated, then stepped aside. Shaq leaned in like a seasoned mechanic, not like a man who once signed deals worth more than most homes on the block. They talked cars, then sports. Not his sports, just high school games, college dreams, the kind of stuff that reminds you everybody used to be somebody before the world told them no. 10 minutes later they had the car running. The young guy thanked him 3 times. Shaq waved it off like a fly. "Just pay it forward," he said. "Fix the next engine you see." That's how it always was with him. Not the flex, not the fame, just a quiet man, moving through the day like his size was the least interesting thing about him. Later he'd sit with his mother, Lucille, on the porch. She still wore her apron like the kitchen followed her outside. "You looked just like your daddy today," she said, passing him a glass of sweet tea. Big man, soft heart. He smiled at that, but it came with a slow sigh. Because what folks didn't know, what they never saw behind that famous grin, was the way Shaq carried things. Guilt, loss, a sense that with every success came a debt, not in money, but in meaning. You don't grow up poor and black in Newark without learning that when you make it out, you better reach back in. He never wanted statues. He wanted impact. That's why, years ago, he started showing up unannounced at public schools. Not for cameras, no press, just him, sitting in gym bleachers, with kids whose eyes lit up like they'd seen a god. He'd kneel to their level, joke about grades, ask about dreams, then disappear. Sometimes he left behind scholarships. Other times just belief. That same belief, though, made him vulnerable. Because when you wear your heart in plain view, folks learn how to touch it for gain. He didn't say that part out loud. Not to his mom. Not yet. But it simmered under his calm that day. Like the way summer heat hums just before a thunderstorm. You could feel it in the way his eyes lingered on the street. Even after the Buick drove off, something was coming. It started with a phone call. A woman named Graslin, teacher at an inner-city charter school. Shaq donated to. Her voice was trembling, asking if he had a minute. "Of course," he said, already pacing his porch barefoot. She said her sister Clarice bought a used SUV from a dealership off Holloway. Claimed they had Shaq's endorsement. Said the cars were part of a foundation he funded. Even had framed photos of him in the office. But Clarice, she got scammed. Papers forged, payments jacked. And when she tried to back out, they threatened to repossess the car and sue. Shaq's face went still. Not angry, just quiet. "I never authorized anything," he said, though the words tasted bitter. He promised to look into it, but something inside him had already shifted. That name, Holloway Motors, It rang in a strange way. Not loud, just wrong. That evening, he drove by the place in a tinted SUV. No entourage, no logos, just curiosity dressed in suspicion. From the outside, the dealership looked like any other. Bright banners, giant inflatable tube men, flailing in forced joy. But there, in the glass window, he saw it. A photo of him smiling beside a car, with the caption "Powered by Shaquille O'Neal's Foundation of Trust." He stared at it, unblinking. He hadn't stepped foot in that place in his life. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because of the scam, but because of what it meant. Someone had weaponized his kindness, used his face, his name as a mask for exploitation. And worse, people believed it, because they trusted him. He kept hearing Graceland's voice, trembling with guilt for connecting the dots too late. He thought about Clarice, probably still paying off a car she didn't own. And he thought about his own image, how easily it could be twisted into something corrupt. That smile. His smile had always been his gift, a soft counter to the stereotype. But now, it had become someone else's tool. He had been robbed, not of money, but of meaning. The next morning he looked different. Not colder, just focused. The kind of calm that comes before deliberate storms. He didn't tell anyone what he planned to do. Not yet. But inside, something had clicked. He'd spent decades helping strangers. Now one of them had helped themselves to his reputation, his legacy, his heart, and they thought he'd let it go. They didn't know Big Shaq. They didn't know that the man behind the smile was also the man who remembered everything. And he was about to remember this. It was supposed to be simple. A good deed, no headlines. That was Shaq's style these days. Quiet help, no camera flash, no brand tie-ins. He'd met her 2 weeks back, at a literacy fundraiser at Southgate Community Hall. Her name was Linnell Greer, a single mother of 3 working 2 jobs, and somehow still finding time to tutor other kids at the shelter. She never asked for anything, but something about the way she handled struggle with that bone-deep steadiness stuck with him. Shaq told her to swing by Holloway Motors the following Saturday, said they had a solid selection, and he'd meet her there with a surprise. She resisted at first, that pride some people wear like armor, but eventually she gave a soft smile, nodded once, and told him she'd bring her lunch break with her. Saturday morning, Atlanta was sticky with the kind of heat that makes the pavement shimmer. Shaq pulled into the lot at Holloway Motors in a plain gray hoodie, ball cap pulled low. No press, no team, just him in a quiet mission. He hadn't been inside the dealership before, but he'd heard of it, seen ads late at night, read Mallory's too bright smile selling trustworthy deals with slogans like "Built on Honor, Driven by Community." Shaq had always hated slogans. The lot itself was cramped, cars lined up too neatly, each one marked with fluorescent stickers, screaming discounts. The kind of place that tried too hard to feel honest. A young woman greeted him before the door fully opened. Her name tag read Katie, and she blinked twice too fast when she recognized him. "Mr. O'Neal," she said, smoothing her blouse instinctively. "Welcome, Mr. Mallory's inside. He's been expecting you." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Expecting me?" She flinched, just a little. "Well, someone said you might drop by." He didn't press it, just followed her through the glass doors into a heavily air-conditioned showroom. It was overly polished, like someone scrubbed away too much of the real. Framed photos lined the walls. Mallory shaking hands with local council members, cutting ribbons, grinning with what looked like forced sincerity. In one frame, Shaq's own face stared back at him beside Mallory. It had to be photoshopped. Shaq had never taken that picture. Reed Mallory appeared from behind a frosted glass office door. Every inch of him curated. Slim charcoal suit, salt and pepper hair styled to perfection. Smile wide enough to suggest either charm or performance, depending on how you looked at it. "Shaquille O'Neal, man of the hour," Reed said, extending a hand confidently. "What an honor. Welcome to Holloway Motors." Shaq shook it, firm but brief. "Just here to help a friend pick out a ride." Reed grinned wider. Of course. You always were the people's champ. We're proud to call you one of Atlanta's own." Shaq gave a slow nod, already clocking the rhythm of the man's voice. Too smooth. Too prepared, like a magician who smiled too hard before pulling a trick. They walked through the lot together. Shaq kept it casual, asking about warranties, safety ratings, down payments. Reed answered with rehearsed ease. Too eager to please. He spoke in buzzwords. community-focused financing, equity-driven lending, transparent guarantees. Shaq glanced over as Linnell arrived. She looked nervous, already apologizing as she stepped out of her borrowed sedan. Shaq waved it off and introduced her to Reed, who turned on the charm full blast. "You're a friend of Shaq? Then you're already family," Reed said with that teeth-showing grin. He personally walked them to the back row, where a silver 2020 SUV waited under a shimmer of polish. It wasn't new, but it looked clean, low miles. "Just got this one in," Reed said, patting the hood like a show dog. "Normally listed at 21, but I think we can cut that down for a special guest. With taxes, documents, let's say 16 flat." Shaq didn't like how fast the numbers came out. They hadn't even negotiated. Still, he said nothing. Just watched. Let the man talk. Linnell looked at him, stunned. I couldn't possibly." Shaq smiled gently. "You earned it. Take the deal." She hesitated, then nodded slowly, that pride cracking open, just enough for Grace to walk in. Paperwork began. Katie brought out folders, and Reed disappeared to run some final numbers. Shaq waited in the lounge, flipping through a magazine without reading a word. Something tugged at the edge of his mind. It wasn't just the slick pitch. It was the pacing, the way they kept moving too fast. When Katie returned, Shaq stood and gently asked to look over the final cost breakdown. There it was. Underneath the listed price sat 3 extra line items: dealer assurance fee, $1,200, processing adjustment, 9 to 100, legacy maintenance program. Shaq frowned. "What's this?" Katie blinked. Standard. They're part of our certified promise package. Mr. Mallory includes them with all VIP deals." "Did I ask for a package?" She hesitated. "Well, no, sir, but most clients." He cut her off with a raised hand. "Take it off." She nodded and walked away, visibly shaken. Shaq's stomach twisted. This wasn't the kind of mistake that came from oversight. It was muscle memory, fraud dressed in routine. The kind of system that counted on people being too overwhelmed to push back. He stayed silent as Linnell signed the final forms. She hugged him afterward, cried a little. "Nobody's ever done something like this for me," she said, and it stung. Not because of the gratitude, but because of what she didn't know had almost happened behind her back. Shaq drove home, tension crawling under his skin. He couldn't shake the image of those 3 charges, couldn't unsee the fake photo, couldn't ignore the fact that Mallory had known he was coming. Someone had tipped him off. That night, he searched the dealership online. Pages of customer reviews, mostly glowing, but every 5th or 6th one had red flags, single stars with stories that echoed each other. Surprise fees, financing switched at the last second, promised warranties never honored. One reviewer mentioned Reed's assistant, forging a signature. Another said their credit report had been pulled 6 times without consent. Shaq kept scrolling. The deeper he went, the clearer the pattern became. The next morning, he made a quiet call to Della Kincaid, a lawyer he trusted from his community rebuilding work. She answered like she was halfway through 3 cases at once. "Talk to me. You ever heard of Holloway Motors?" A beat. Reed Mallory's joint. Shaq's jaw tightened. "Yeah." Della exhaled, sharp and frustrated. "Yeah, I've heard. Can't prove half of it. That man's slippery, knows just how to skirt the line." "You think it's criminal?" "I think it's rotten. The kind that smells clean 'cause it's wearing cologne." Shaq looked out his window, hands steepled. "I want to know everything about him." Quietly. "Say let." The days that followed moved slow. Shaq didn't confront Mallory, didn't call the news, didn't tell Linnell. He just observed, watched, dug, used his resources, not for spectacle, but for silent inquiry. Reed Mallory had built his empire on smiling lies, and Shaq, the man behind a smile himself, knew exactly how dangerous that could be. One evening, he returned to Holloway Motors alone. Said he was looking for a vehicle, for a cousin. This time, he stayed longer, listened more. He noticed the fine print on contracts that contradicted the pitch. Watched another family get pressured into a higher package. Took mental snapshots of every name, every smile that didn't reach the eyes. He noticed how Katie flinched each time Reed passed by. He noticed how Reed slipped behind closed doors when numbers didn't add up. And he noticed the security cameras. Not for protection, but for optics. On his way out, he passed the fake photo again. His own face, smiling above a dealership that he now knew had lied not just to him but through him. Outside, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the lot. Shaq stood there, staring at the building, jaw tight. His whole life, people had underestimated him because he was big, because he smiled, because he didn't always shout, but he'd learned how to watch without blinking, how to wait for the right moment, how to keep his fists down, and his mind sharp. This wasn't just about a dealership anymore. It was about trust. And Shaquille O'Neal had just found the crack in something built on lies. If you were just glancing, just flipping through your Sunday morning paper, watching local news on mute while stirring your coffee, you'd think Reed Mallory was the kind of man cities are built on. You'd see him in crisp suits shaking hands with city council members, cutting ribbons at community centers he didn't fund, posing with oversized checks made out to causes he barely understood. You'd see him under golden lighting at charity auctions, raising glasses with judges and preachers and PTA presidents, flashing that practiced smile like it was currency. But what the papers don't show, what they never do, is the cost of the smiles he buys. Shaq didn't stumble into this realization. He studied it, peeled back the image layer by layer, until the shine gave way to rust. It started with whispers. People reaching out after hearing he'd been at Holloway Motors. A woman emailed late one night, said her elderly father, a retired school principal, had been pressured into trading his sedan for a smart SUV that died 3 months in. The dealership blamed user error, a term Reed's contracts used frequently and conveniently. The warranty, voided. The payments, locked in. Another message arrived. A veteran, mid-60s, broke down in a voicemail. Said he felt ashamed even speaking. Said he trusted the dealership because of the framed photos. Because Shaq's face was there. He took that as a stamp of honor. But they added last-minute charges, rushed the signing, gave him no copy of the contract. 3 months later, the car was repossessed. He called Holloway and was told the issue was non-compliance with terms. When he demanded specifics, they threatened legal action. Shaq sat through that voicemail twice, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. Reed wasn't just selling cars, he was selling hope in a bottle, sealed with a handshake, and priced with quiet exploitation. Shaq knew this game. Not this version, maybe, but the deeper version. He'd seen it in banks that gave predatory loans to families who didn't know better, in schools that promised scholarships with strings so tangled they choked potential, in media headlines that praised surface-level charity and ignored systemic manipulation. Reed Mallory had figured out the most dangerous version of the scam: emotional theft. He targeted not just wallets, but dignity. And he did it with the ease of a man who'd stopped seeing people as people a long time ago. So Shaq started building a map, not on paper, but in his mind, in his gut. He connected names, addresses, receipts. He partnered quietly with Della Kincaid, who began combing through contracts with a magnifying glass only someone who knew the smell of legal rot could carry. She discovered signature mismatches, loan terms altered post-signing, hidden clauses buried beneath paragraph soup. What emerged wasn't just one man's hustle. It was a system, a machinery built to prey on vulnerability. Shaq took drives late at night, not because he needed space, but because he needed answers. He started visiting some of the families affected, never introduced himself as Shaq. Just walked up, gentle voice, listening more than talking. One woman, Miss Idra Linton, ran a daycare out of her home and had been saddled with a van loan. Reed called a small business investment. The van broke down after 6 weeks. The financing company, owned by one of Reed's shell partners. She'd called Holloway Motors 20 times and was eventually told her number would be blocked. Shaq sat with her on her porch. They didn't talk cars. They talked about the kids she watched every day. She said they asked why she walked them to the park now instead of driving. Told him walking's healthier, she said. Then she laughed, but not the happy kind. The hollow kind, like the laugh was just a shield. Shaq left her house with his fists clenched in his pockets. He realized something else then. Reed wasn't running a dealership. He was running a confidence racket, one built not on desperation alone, but on trust. Trust from people who were tired, people who'd been taught to say yes before they even understood what was being sold. And the kicker? Reed had weaponized Shaq's name to do it. There was an entire wall at Holloway Motors, labeled Local Legends, photos of community figures, influencers, a few national names, and there, again, was that same fake image of Shaq shaking Reed's hand beside a luxury coupe. This wasn't just poor ethics, it was identity theft masquerading as brand synergy. So Shaq did what few expected. He didn't go public. Not yet. Instead, he created a timeline. He told Della, "I want to bury him with truth, not noise." They looked into how Holloway acquired its cars. Turns out, many were salvage vehicles restored just enough to look new, rebranded through a shell company called DriveCore Inc., which Reed co-owned but never publicly admitted. DriveCore was buying from auction lots that specialized in flood-damaged inventory. The cars were cleaned, the paperwork tweaked, and the titles washed clean in states with weak regulation. Shaq began collecting footage, not hidden camera-type stuff, but subtle documentation. A phone left recording in his pocket, a pen-shaped recorder, a few casual follow-ups at the dealership, pretending to ask about buying for friends. Reed bragged often, like most men who assume their charm is stronger than suspicion. Once over coffee in Reed's office, Shaq casually asked about his business model. Reed leaned back, hands folded like a professor of grift. "It's about giving people what they think they need," Reed said. "You offer it in the right language. Financial freedom, community loyalty, and you never have to lie. Just let them fill in the blanks." Shaq just nodded, every muscle in his jaw locked in silence. He learned that the dealership hosted community financial seminars once a month. Supposedly educational, but in truth they were just long sales pitches dressed in civic language. People left those meetings with handshakes and business cards, and a sense of gratitude for being considered. Shaq attended one, hidden in the back in a hoodie. Watched as Reed used stories, not stats. Stories about single mothers who made it work, veterans who found their second start. No names, no proof. Just soft hooks made of hope. The audience nodded. Some even cried. He realized Reed didn't just want money. He wanted belief. That was the real theft. Because when someone steals your money, you can rebuild. But when they steal your faith in people, in systems, in your own ability to make smart choices, that's when the damage lingers. Reed had become a master thief of belief. It was a level of fraud most people didn't have words for. Because the victims didn't know what they'd lost. Only that something inside them had dimmed. Shaq remembered something his mother once told him. Back when he was just a lanky teenager trying to outgrow his own shadow. She said, "Some people won't rob you with a gun, baby. They'll use a handshake. They'll smile and say they're doing you a favor." He hadn't understood it then. Now, he did. And now he was ready to return the favor. It had been months since Shaq last saw the kid with the green hoodie. Used to be a regular thing. Every time Shaq pulled onto Ashford Lane, the boy would be there, leaning against the rusted fence across from Miss Florence's yard, hoodie pulled tight no matter the weather, that shy little wave ready like clockwork. He never said a word, just waved. Every time, like a ritual between strangers who knew nothing about each other's lives, but respected the rhythm of the gesture. Shaq had never asked his name, never thought to, not out of neglect, but because it was easier, sometimes to let simple moments stay simple. You forget, until it's too late, how quickly silence can turn into regret. It was on a Wednesday morning, quiet, blue-skied, the kind of day that felt borrowed from spring, that Shaq noticed the space across the street was empty. Fence still stood, trash still gathered in that one corner where the wind always blew. But the boy wasn't there. Not the next day, not the one after. It felt strange, how easily absence could echo louder than presence. A week passed before Shaq finally knocked on Miss Florence's screen door. "You remember that boy?" he asked. "Used to stand over by that fence, always wearing the green hoodie." Miss Florence's eyes clouded. She stepped out onto the porch and leaned on the railing like the answer was buried somewhere out in the street. "Trevin," she said finally. That was his name. Trevin Jones. Lived 2 houses down, with his mama Cassandra. Sweet woman. Quiet. Kept to herself. Shaq nodded, heart thudding, already sensing the rest of the sentence wasn't going to end well. "Been gone," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Been gone near 3 months now." "Moved?" Her silence was the answer. Shaq sat on the steps long after she went back inside. He didn't know Trevin, not really, but the boy had become part of the neighborhood's rhythm, a fixed point, and now, just like that, he was gone. Later that day, curiosity turned into a lead. He drove down to the house where Miss Florence said they used to stay. The windows were boarded up. A foreclosure notice, half torn, clung to the front door. The porch steps looked broken, like the house itself had exhaled its last breath, and collapsed inward. He didn't knock. There was no one to answer. Back in his SUV, Shaq sat staring at that door. That's when the guilt crept in. Not the sharp kind, but the heavy kind. The kind that settled in your chest and stayed there, slow and unmovable. He'd smiled at that boy, waved, drove past with his tinted windows, and his quiet privilege. He hadn't known, and now it felt like he should have. He called Della. "Find me anything you can on Cassandra Jones," he said. "Used to live on Ashford." Her boy's name was Trevin. Della didn't ask why. She knew his voice well enough by now to understand when something had gotten under his skin. 2 days later, she called him back. Her voice was quieter than usual. "She bought a used sedan from Holloway Motors last year. August. Financing agreement. 18. Shaq gripped the edge of the table. 6 weeks after that, Della continued. She missed a payment. They added fees, then repossessed it before the 3rd month. No warnings. Claimed breach of contract due to non-disclosure of income. He closed his eyes, trying to picture Trevin's face. The way he always waved, even when it rained. Especially when it rained. House was foreclosed 2 months later. I pulled court filings. No lawyer, no appeal. Just silence. Then eviction. Shaq sat there staring at the grain in his dining table like it could explain something. Anything. Della cleared her throat gently. "Want me to dig deeper?" He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Find them." The search wasn't easy. Cassandra had no forwarding address, no social media, no paper trail. It was like she'd vanished. Like Trevin had never stood on that street corner in that same damn hoodie, smiling through poverty and waving like hope was still alive. But eventually Della called back. "She's in Macon. At a shelter called Harvest Grace." She used her old mailing address for food stamps. "That's how I found her." Shaq didn't wait. He drove down the next morning. No driver, no fanfare, just him and the highway, and a silence that screamed at him the whole ride. The shelter was smaller than he expected. No signs out front, just a hand-painted cross above a weather-worn door. Inside, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard looked him up and down. "You here for Cassandra?" He nodded. "She's in the back with her son. I'll let her know you're here." The room smelled of Lysol and boiled rice. Shaq stood by the hallway, heart thudding like he was back at the free throw line with seconds on the clock. But this wasn't a game. This was a reckoning. Cassandra walked out slowly, Trevin trailing behind her. He looked older, smaller, thinner. The hoodie was gone. In its place was a faded long-sleeve shirt that didn't quite fit. His eyes lit up when he saw Shaq. "Hey," he said, a whisper of the old wave in his voice. Shaq knelt down, smiling softly. "I missed you, little man." Trevin nodded like he understood more than he should. Cassandra didn't smile. Not at first. She stood behind her son, arms crossed. Her face didn't carry blame. It carried exhaustion. The kind that doesn't fade with rest. Shaq stood. "I'm sorry," he said, not even sure what part he meant. Maybe all of it. She looked at him a long time before speaking. "You ever watch your child go quiet? Not 'cause he's shy, but 'cause he knows you're breaking inside." He didn't answer. She nodded slowly. "That car. Reed said it was a starter deal. Said I was lucky to get approved. Said if I signed that day he'd waive the deposit." Shaq's stomach turned. "Felt like a blessing," she continued. "Like maybe we'd finally caught a break. But the payments kept shifting. I called. They gave me new numbers every time. Told me if I missed another one, they'd ruin my credit. So I stopped calling." Her voice broke just a little. Not a full crack, just a tremor. And the car was gone. Middle of the night. Towed from the street like we never owned it. After that, it all unraveled. Shaq exhaled. Heavy. Slow. Regret sat in his chest like bricks. "You ain't the one who did it," she said. "But they used your face." He looked down. That photo. That damn photo. It haunted him like a scar with no wound. "I'm gonna make this right," he said. She shook her head. "You can't give us back what we lost." "I know," he said, "but I can give you what's next." She didn't nod. Didn't resist. Just stood there holding Trevin close. Later that night, Shaq sat in his SUV outside the shelter for over an hour, staring at the building. The truth settled like rain on his windshield. This wasn't just about a crooked car deal anymore. It was about the damage that doesn't show up on paper, the kind that echoes in dinnerless nights and long walks to school in silence from kids who used to wave. Trevin had become the face of this story now. Not because he asked to, but because Shaq needed a reason bigger than justice. He needed something human. Something that reminded him why this fight mattered. And Trevin, with his too big smile and vanished green hoodie, was that reason. The boy had disappeared once. Shaq was going to make damn sure he didn't disappear again. The problem with trying to do the right thing inside the system is that sometimes the system's been built not to work for people like you. Shaq learned that fast. It started with an email. Della had compiled over 30 cases. Families, seniors, veterans, even 2 small business owners, all carrying variations of the same story. Buried fees, lost paperwork, mysterious charges, signatures that looked close but not quite. At first glance, each case looked isolated, a matter of oversight or miscommunication. But laid side by side, the pattern became surgical. Shaq read every single one. Names, amounts, dates, whole lives shoved through red ink and fine print. He took the folder to a friend at the Fulton County DA's office, someone he trusted, a sharp guy named Monroe Steele, all pinstripes and legal tenacity. Monroe read the summary, frowned, read it again. "This is bad," he said. "Real bad." Shaq nodded once. "Then let's move." Monroe hesitated, setting the papers down like they were radioactive. "Problem is, Reed Mallory's not some sloppy crook. He's careful. He makes sure every mistake looks like human error or consumer confusion. And the people getting hurt? They can't afford lawyers. They don't have leverage. You walk this into court, it'll get buried under language." Shaq leaned back in the leather chair. "So you're saying he's smart. I'm saying he's protected." That word, it stuck. Protected. Like Reed wasn't just hiding behind paperwork, but behind people. Shaq left the office with his teeth clenched, heart pounding. It wasn't that he couldn't fight. He'd fought all his life for space, for dignity, for respect in rooms that didn't expect him to be intelligent, strategic, soft-spoken. But this wasn't a basketball court. This was bureaucracy. And in this arena, knowing the truth didn't matter unless you could make it scream. So he turned to Della again. They met at her office late on a Thursday, long after the city had dimmed and gone quiet. She handed him a cup of coffee and pulled up a chair. Her hair was tied back, no makeup, just fire in her eyes. "I filed a formal complaint with the State Consumer Affairs Board," she said. "Didn't use your name, just the evidence. But I'm not optimistic." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because Reed Mallory donates to 3 of the board's major sponsors. He helped fund a judge's re-election campaign last year, and 2 of the consumer protection lawyers. They used to represent his financing company. The one tied to those washed title cars." Shaq exhaled, jaw clenching. "He's got insulation," she continued. "Layers of it. He doesn't just cover his tracks, he paves over them with charity and sponsorships. You ever see a wolf wear sheep's clothing so long he starts to look like a shepherd?" Shaq didn't respond right away, just stared at the legal documents in his hands. It wasn't disbelief, it was calculation. "So what now?" he finally said. "We just let it slide?" Della shook her head slowly. "No, but we can't hit him head on. Not yet. The courts won't help. The law's slow, and Reed knows how to wait. If we move too soon, we lose everything." Silence settled like dust. Then Shaq leaned forward, fingers steepled. His voice was calm, too calm. "Then we don't move through the courts," he said. "We move through the court of opinion." Della looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You want exposure?" "No," he said, eyes locked. "I want revelation." There was a difference. Anyone could go on a podcast or make a post go viral. But Shaq wasn't interested in noise. He wanted weight, proof, unshakable, undeniable, pressure-soaked truth. He started laying it out in his mind right there. Reed Mallory had built a brand on curated trust community dinners, TV appearances, photo ops with ministers. All it would take was one crack. One undeniable fracture in the foundation for the whole thing to start caving in. But it had to be surgical. No theatrics. Just truth dressed in simplicity. Shaq called in a contact from a docuseries crew he'd worked with on a youth mentoring special 2 years ago. A guy named Julius Verne, obsessed with authenticity, allergic to filters. "I don't want a takedown piece," Shaq told him over the phone. "I want a mirror." Julius flew in the next day. They met in a small downtown studio. Shaq laid out the plan. No narration, no dramatic music. Just interviews, victims telling their stories, Paperwork lined up with timelines. Footage. Receipts. Real people. Real consequences. Julius nodded, eyes wide. You really want to do this? Shaq just said. He used my face. Now I'm giving people my voice. Meanwhile, Della went deeper into the finance trail. She traced one of Reed's shell companies, Coastal Venture Holdings, to a private equity group based out of Dallas. Same group that had lobbied against tenant protection laws 2 years ago. Same group that quietly funded dealerships in transitioning neighborhoods, where people were more likely to sign without reading, where trust was easier to exploit. The more they uncovered, the more sinister it felt. Shaq couldn't sleep, not because of rage, but because of weight. All the moments he'd been celebrated for helping communities, the backpacks, the scholarships, the hospital wings, none of them meant a thing if his name had been used to bleed people dry. He thought about Trevin, about Cassandra's voice trembling with strength, about the veteran who said he felt like less of a man after losing a car he never should have bought. He thought about the look in Reed Mallory's eyes the last time they met. How easy it was for him to lie. How comfortable he'd gotten behind that polished desk. It was personal now. But not out of vengeance. Out of duty. Della brought him one last document. A non-disclosure agreement buried in a complaint filed by a former employee of Holloway Motors. The NDA was aggressive. Gag clauses. Threats of financial ruin. The employee, Rhea Alston, had left after refusing to forge a financing application. Della tracked her down through a friend in housing mediation. Shaq met her at a diner on the outskirts of town. She was young. Early 30s. Nervous. But not afraid. I knew it was wrong, she said, stirring her iced tea. But they made it look normal. Said it was policy. Said if I didn't do it, someone else would. And when I pushed back, well, they made it clear I wasn't gonna grow there. Shaq asked if she'd be willing to go on record. She looked away for a long time, then back at him. You think this'll actually matter? It already does, he said, because the lie only lives until someone names it. She didn't answer. But 3 days later, she showed up to Julius's studio, sat in the chair, looked straight into the lens, and told the truth. Piece by piece, it was all coming together. Shaq's anger hadn't gone away. It had evolved, turned into focus, precision. Reed had the system, but Shaq had the story. And that was something even the system couldn't stop once it started moving. If the system wouldn't hold Reed accountable, then Shaq had to design a new one where truth didn't need permission to speak, and exposure could hit just as hard as any sentence. That's how Lamont Daniels was born. Lamont had a story. He was a wealthy investor from Baton Rouge, soft-spoken but ambitious, newly relocated to Atlanta, with an inheritance he didn't fully understand, and a desire to diversify into real estate and automotive ventures. Lamont dressed differently. No branded sweats, no basketball shoes, no gold watch, just button-downs, khakis, and reading glasses. Shaq didn't need but wore anyway. The accent was lighter, deliberate, the body language, relaxed, unsure. Like money had come fast but understanding hadn't caught up yet. Shaq studied the role like a script. He needed Reed to see him not as a threat, but as prey. The introduction happened through a third-party contact, an actor friend from LA posing as Lamont's financial advisor. They called Holloway Motors, requesting a sit-down with Mr. Mallory to discuss expansion possibilities. Reed, predictably, bit hard. Within hours he returned the call himself. Always happy to meet a fellow entrepreneur, Reed said over speakerphone. Especially one with vision. The meeting was set for a Tuesday at noon. Shaq arrived early as Lamont, stepping out of a rented Lexus. No security, no fanfare, just a nervous-looking man with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Reed greeted him at the door, hand extended, charisma turned up. You must be Lamont. Welcome to Holloway. I like your style. Quiet, understated. Smart money always walks soft. Shaq offered a sheepish chuckle and shook the hand that had robbed so many people quietly. He wore a button cam under his lapel and a wire under his shirt, both synced to Julius's team waiting a few blocks away in a parked van. Audio rolled from the moment Shaq stepped out of the car. Inside, Reed gave the grand tour, the showroom, the staff, the trophy case of dealership awards that looked more like participation medals for corruption. He called the operation efficient, community-oriented, and positioned for vertical integration. Though none of those words really meant anything, it was salesmanship at its most hollow. So what brings you to my neck of the woods? Reed asked, as they sat in his glass-walled office. Shaq as Limont shifted in his chair. Honestly, I inherited some cash after my pops passed. Real estate felt too crowded. I'm from the South, so I like cars. Thought, why not dealerships? Something steady. Reed smiled like a wolf who just saw a fence break. You picked the right guy to talk to, he said, leaning in. See this place, it's more than cars. It's leverage. You control the loans, the insurance, the maintenance. You don't just sell, you cycle, you recycle. Shaq tilted his head, feigning confusion. Cycle? Reed grinned wider. You get someone in a vehicle with bad credit. You add high-interest financing. They miss a payment. You take the car back, sell it again. Same car, multiple profits. Shaq kept his face blank, as if that wasn't the most unethical thing he'd heard in a decade. You ever get caught? He asked, his voice soft. Reed laughed. No. I mean, we walk the line, never cross it. There's a difference. You learn how to speak legal. You bake in your language. Optional programs. Recommended protections. Nothing forced, just heavily suggested. The man was practically confessing, and he didn't even realize it. Over the next 3 weeks, Shaq returned as Lamont. They met twice a week. Reed gave him tips, offered to help him seed his first investment by partnering on a satellite lot in Gwinnett. He even drew up a proposal for a 70-30 profit share. You're green, Reed said once. But that's okay. I like green. It means I can shape your instincts. Each time, Julius's team recorded everything. Video, audio, timestamps. They watched as Reed slowly lowered his guard, letting the facade slip in small ways, bragging about a deal where he convinced a local pastor to pay 20% more than book value, mentioning a lawyer he paid off with consulting work, even laughing about how Shaq's face is the best marketing I never had to pay for. That one stung. But Shaq never broke character. He let Reed believe. One afternoon, they went to lunch at a quiet rooftop cafe in Buckhead. Reed ordered wine. Shaq ordered iced tea. The city stretched beneath them like a silent witness. You know, Lamont, Reed said, swirling his glass. It's not about lying. It's about narrative. You sell the story they want to believe. You don't tell them they're poor. You tell them they're building. You don't say loan. You say leverage. You give them pride, and let that pride pay for the package. Shaq nodded slowly. What if they catch on? They don't, or if they do, it's too late. By the time the repo happens, they're too embarrassed to talk. People don't like admitting they got played. Shame's a beautiful muzzle. Back in the van, Julius whispered, "We got him." Shaq stirred his straw. At that point, Reed had introduced Lamont to his finance manager, his marketing team, and his lawyer. Each time, Shaq played the same role. Soft-spoken, curious, easily impressed. He even invested $25,000 into the Gwinnett lot, wired from a dummy account set up by Della's firm to mimic a real fund. The money was traceable, the wire confirmed, and with that, Shaq had something concrete, proof of Reed entering a business deal under false pretenses with promises he never intended to keep. The final meeting happened on a Friday. Reed brought him into the back office. No windows, just dark wood, leather chairs, and the faint smell of aged bourbon. "I like you, Lamont," he said. "You remind me of me. Before I learned how to really move." Shaq leaned in. "So how do you really move?" Reed smirked. "You learn to smile through the cell, to look clean while playing dirty. Everyone out there," he gestured toward the city skyline, "they want to be seen doing good. Me? I'd rather be unseen doing well." Shaq smiled back. Inside, his heart was racing. This was it. Reed leaned closer, like he couldn't help himself. "Hell, I once sold a salvaged Escalade to a judge's cousin. Frame was bent like a question mark. But you know what? Judge never complained, because I smiled. I made it feel like a favor." Shaq just blinked slowly. The camera in his button rolled. The audio recorder under his shirt caught every word. When he stood up to leave, Reed clasped his shoulder. "We're gonna make a lot of money, you and me." Shaq offered one last nod. "Sure we are." As he walked out, the name Lamont Daniels disappeared with every step. By the time he reached the parking lot, Shaq had returned. The real one. The one who didn't need to smile to make a point. The one who'd spent weeks being underestimated, played, spoken down to. And now, he had everything he needed. It was one of those noon hours when the heat didn't care about shade, and the sun sat directly overhead like it was daring someone to argue with it. Shaq had shown up as Lamont again, dressed light in a linen shirt and slacks, moving slower than usual. He wasn't there to ask questions. He wasn't there to invest. He was there to watch. He parked in the far corner of Holloway Motors, where the camera coverage was weakest, and the sound of the city softened behind the rows of used cars and glossy lies. The wire under his collar had been upgraded, a longer battery, higher fidelity. Julius's team, stationed just a few blocks away, had been told to stay quiet unless the world flipped upside down. Shaq took a slow walk across the lot, greeting Katie at the front desk with the kind of friendly nod Lamont had mastered. She barely looked up this time. Her face looked tired, eyes darting like she was trying to stay invisible inside the job. He made a note of it. The guilt lived in her movements now. Reed wasn't in his office. That's when Shaq heard the voices. Not raised, but sharp. Tight. The kind of tone that slices cleaner than shouting. He followed the sound past the back hallway where the service manager usually smoked. Then he saw them. Reed Mallory stood half-shadowed beside a row of SUVs. Posture stiff. Voice low but acidic. Facing him was a woman. Mid-30s maybe. Visibly pregnant. Her hand rested on the curve of her belly, like it was the only anchor she had left. Her expression was clenched. Anger. Fear. Something older than Maz. She held a thin folder in one hand, papers half slipping out the sides. "I didn't sign for that," she said, her voice shaking not from weakness, but rage held too long. "The contract I have doesn't show that warranty fee. You added it after I left." Reed's voice was coated in that same faux polite varnish Shaq had come to recognize. "Ma'am, you signed where the terms were clear. You had ample opportunity to review the disclosures. They handed me a copy in the parking lot after I paid. That's standard practice." "You scammed me," she snapped, loud enough to catch a passing mechanic's glance. Shaq stayed back, half shielded behind a lifted truck, his chest tight. Every instinct screamed at him to step in, to speak, to say his real name. But he didn't. Instead, he pressed the record button. The woman stepped closer. "I called the finance company. They told me the loan included coverage I never approved. And if I don't keep up payments, they're gonna repossess the car." Reed's mask slipped for a breath. "You should have read the fine print, Miss Ellis. Next time, bring someone who understands contracts." Her hand curled into a fist around the folder. Not a punch. A hold. Something to keep from falling apart. "You're the reason people stop trusting everyone," she whispered. "You walk around with your suit, and your smile and your brochures about community. This conversation is over. No. You're gonna fix this. You're gonna pull that fee." "I don't do special favors for people who sign then change their minds," Reed said. "That's not how business works." She shook her head. "No, that's exactly how your business works." And then, like she knew there was nothing else she could do, she turned and walked out. Not fast. Not defeated. Just done. Shaq didn't follow her. Didn't step out. He stayed frozen behind that truck, stomach a furnace of guilt and strategy. Reed stood there a moment longer, straightened his jacket, and let out a breath like he'd just swatted a fly. Shaq walked away quietly, slipping into the restroom to steady his hands before he left. In the mirror, Lamont Daniels looked back at him. But it was Shaq's thoughts screaming beneath the surface. Back in his car, engine idling, he whispered into the recorder. "Sometimes you gotta let the lie breathe to kill it properly." That night, he didn't sleep. He played the recording back 7 times. He watched Reed's face freeze when the woman called out his two-faced nature. He listened to her voice crack, not from fear, but from trying too hard to hold the weight of her own dignity. And he thought about that baby, still unborn, already tied to paperwork stained with deceit. He called Della. "Tasha Ellis," he said. "Find her. I want her to know she's not alone." "I'll find her," Della replied. Julius called soon after. "We've got enough," he said. "This combined with what we already pulled, it's airtight." Shaq stared out his window. "Not yet. What more do you need?" "Proof he thinks he's untouchable." "You think he hasn't already proven that?" "I need him to show the world. Not just me." The next day, Shaq returned to Holloway Motors. Not as Lamont. Not as Shaq. He wore the in-between, plain denim ball cap low, no performance. He walked straight into Reed's office without waiting. Reed stood, surprised. "Didn't expect you today. Something on your mind?" Shaq nodded slowly. "Just wondering what your policy is on customer disputes." Reed chuckled. "My policy?" Shaq shrugged. "Say someone comes in with proof of forged documents. Or unauthorized fees. What happened? Reed smiled like he always did. You settle them quietly, or you outlast them. Shaq tilted his head. Even if they're telling the truth. Reed leaned back. Truth's subjective. What matters is the contract. People think they're victims 'cause they're emotional. But paper's the only language courts speak. Shaq didn't blink. You're gonna regret saying that, he said. Reed raised an eyebrow. Why is that? Shaq smiled. Because this time, the court ain't in a building. He walked out before Reed could respond. That night, he reviewed the footage again. Tasha's confrontation, Reed's cold dismissal. Every flicker of that toxic calm. The tape was ugly, raw, real, but it was true. Julius and Della synced everything. Timestamps, documents, testimonial overlays. They were almost ready. Almost. Shaq knew the next part wasn't going to be easy. But then again, nothing worth changing ever was. Shaq nodded. Standing slow. He followed her to a small room at the end of a corridor. Maybe 8 feet across, no windows, just a bunk bed, and 2 duffel bags pushed against the wall. Cassandra sat at the edge of the lower bunk, arms crossed over her knees, her eyes low and tired. She looked older than she was. Life had sped up the aging process. Trevin was curled up in the corner with a library book. Headphones on. When he looked up and saw Shaq, something shifted in his face. Not excitement, not surprise, just recognition. Like seeing a lighthouse after drifting too long. Hi, Trevin, Shaq said softly. The boy didn't say anything, just nodded once, then went back to his book, peeking up every now and then, like he couldn't believe it was real. Shaq turned to Cassandra. Thank you for letting me come. She shrugged. Didn't have much reason not to. He sat across from her on a plastic chair that creaked under his weight. The silence between them stretched. I didn't know, he said. Of course you didn't, she replied, voice thin. Nobody ever does. He looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't angry at him. She was tired of fighting. Her face wasn't guarded. It was bruised from disappointment. I was just trying to get ahead, she said, more to herself than to him. That car felt like a way out. My job was 30 minutes away. Buses don't run that far out. Trevin had school, aftercare. I needed something stable. Shaq listened. Every word landed heavy. They made it easy, she said. Too easy. Said I was pre-approved. Reed came out himself. Gave Trevin a baseball cap. Told me I was the kind of mother that made the neighborhood strong. Said he was proud to help someone like me. She paused, eyes glistening. He smiled at us like he was doing us a favor. Shaq didn't speak. Payments started climbing after the 2nd month, she said. I called every week. They passed me around, told me to reassess my financial strategy. Like I hadn't already sold everything but my mother's dishes. Her voice broke then. Not a sob, not dramatic. Just a crack. Like something underneath her ribs had finally snapped. They took the car on a Sunday morning, she whispered. Came while we were inside. Trevin thought it got stolen. He cried. I told him we parked it wrong. That it got towed. I lied to my own child. Shaq looked down. His hands were clenched without him knowing it. The rent was already late. I was picking up weekend shifts. No car meant no work. No work meant eviction. It took 61 days for everything to fall apart. She fell silent. I see him now, she said finally, nodding toward Trevin. Doesn't talk much. Not like before. Doesn't trust when people smile anymore. Shaq swallowed hard. I can't fix what happened. She didn't move. But I can give you both a place to stay. Tonight, tomorrow, as long as you need. No condition. Cassandra looked over at Trevin, then back at Shaq. Her eyes held questions. Is this pity? Is this guilt? Is this another promise that'll fall apart? But she didn't ask them. Instead, she said, okay. That night, Shaq drove them to an apartment complex he owned, under an anonymous trust. Quiet place in a better part of town. 2 bedrooms, furnished, groceries already stocked. He handed Cassandra the keys and walked back to his SUV. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat alone on his porch in Atlanta, looking out at the street where Trevin used to wave from. He kept thinking about that line. He smiled at us like he was doing us a favor. That smile, the same kind Reed wore, the same one in that fake photo, the same one the world expected from Shaq. It wasn't just a scam. It was a theft of trust. The worst kind. He couldn't change the past, but he could burn down the system that allowed it. brick by brick, smile by smile. The next morning he met with Julius. "We move soon," Shaq said. Julius raised an eyebrow. "We dropping the series?" "No," Shaq said. "We're dropping a mirror." The ghost of Trevin wasn't just a boy in a hoodie anymore. He was the face of every story Reed thought would stay buried. Not anymore. The offer came in on a Thursday. It was clean, aggressive, and designed to hit every nerve in Reed Mallory's ego. Lamont Daniels, the green investor from Baton Rouge, was ready to make it official. He wanted to buy a majority stake in Holloway Motors. 70% control, effective immediately. The deal was valued at $4.3 million. A mix of liquid assets, assumed debts, and future site development incentives. The contract was drafted to look like a dream. No strings, no questions. A legacy deal. Reed didn't hesitate. Not because the numbers made sense. Shaq made sure they did. But because Reed had grown addicted to the myth of his own genius. Lamont was the perfect successor in Reed's eyes. Wealthy, malleable, a little too green. Just smart enough to make money but not smart enough to challenge him. A golden ticket wrapped in a soft handshake. The meeting was set for noon on a Monday. One of those crisp southern spring days where the sun wasn't too hot, and the sky felt artificially blue. Shaq arrived dressed sharp, fitted navy suit, subtle gold cufflinks, a leather-bound briefcase in hand. He looked like Lamont, but inside, every part of him was Shaq. The lobby was quieter than usual. Most of the staff had been told to take their lunch early, a move Reed claimed would give us some breathing room to focus on big business. Shaq knew it for what it was, control. Reed didn't like distractions when he played his biggest game. Reed greeted him with an open palm and a fake humility polished to perfection. "You sure about this, Lamont?" He grinned. "It's not every day I hand over my crown." Shaq returned the smile. "I'm sure." They moved into Reed's office. The conference table had been cleared. Fresh documents spread neatly across the surface, highlighted for emphasis. 2 pens rested on either side, a symbolic balance waiting to be broken. Reed walked through the paperwork like a man leading a tour of his kingdom. "You're stepping into something real here. Holloway's more than a dealership. It's a brand, a reputation. People trust me because they know I get it done." Shaq nodded. "Calm. I want to continue that." Reed poured himself a drink. This right here," he said, raising the glass toward the window, "is legacy. It's what we leave behind when the suits are folded and the news cameras stop caring. You feel me?" Shaq stared at him. "I do." He signed first, Lamont's name, penned in practiced rhythm. Then he handed the pen to Reed. "You sure you're ready to let go?" Shaq asked, with a softness that baited confidence. Reed chuckled. "I'm not letting go. I'm leveling up." He signed. Shaq closed the folder slowly. His hands moved deliberately now, like the rhythm of the moment had shifted. "Because it—" "Congratulations," Reed said. "Welcome to the family." Shaq stood, extended his hand. Reed reached out, smug, satisfied, blind. Their palms met, and Shaq tightened the grip, just slightly, and leaned in. "You remember Trevin?" he said, voice calm, eyes locked. Reed blinked. "What?" "You should." Reed started to pull back, confused. His grin twitched. "What are you talking about?" Shaq let go. The door to the office opened. A woman entered first, camera in hand. Then Julius. Then Della. Behind them, 2 journalists from Atlanta Weekly and a documentary crew. Boom mic above. Second camera rolling. Recorders blinking red. Reed turned a shade paler. "What the hell is this?" Shaq stepped aside, gesturing toward the cameras. "It's called a reckoning." Reed's eyes darted to the paperwork. This is confidential. This is entrapment." Julius raised a tablet and pressed play. Audio from previous meetings rolled clear and sharp. "You recycle. Same car, multiple profits. Shame's a beautiful muzzle. You sell the story they want to believe." Shaq watched Reed freeze just for a second. A flicker of panic beneath all that tailored bravado. The camera zoomed in slowly. "You forged contracts," Della said, stepping forward. "You lied about financing. You manipulated vulnerable buyers. We have 23 testimonies, signed, verified, corroborated." Reed took a step back. "You can't just— This isn't court, this is slander." "No," Shaq said. "This is truth. Streaming live." Reed turned toward the corner of the room. Mounted discreetly, blinking red, was a live feed camera tied directly to multiple social platforms and Julius's media site. By now the broadcast had been shared, reposted, clipped into headlines. "I never said those things," Reed muttered. Julius hit another clip. "Judge never complained. Because I smiled. I made it feel like a favor." Shaq walked over to the window, looking out over the lot where it all started. "You used my face," he said, "my name, my story, to sell lies to people who trusted me. Families, mothers, veterans, kids who waved at me from corners." He turned. "But now they know who you really are." Reed tried to collect himself. He turned to the camera. "You're just bitter. This is revenge." Shaq didn't blink. "No. Revenge is messy. This is clarity." The broadcast was still rolling. Shaq stepped forward and opened the folder again, revealing an alternate version of the contract. The one that included a clause for full transfer of operational control, invoked the moment of confirmed fraud or misrepresentation by the seller, triggered by the audio evidence. "You signed this," Shaq said. "We had lawyers review it. Multiple times. Every box is legal." Reed's face twisted. "This is a stunt. You can't bury a man like me with a video." "You're right," Della said. "But we don't have to. You buried yourself." By the time the press arrived outside, Reed was pacing the floor, sweat starting to form at his hairline. Shaq walked past him, briefcase in hand, nodding once to Julius. "We'll have statements ready in an hour," Shaq said. Reed followed him to the door. "This isn't over." Shaq paused in the frame. "No," he said. "It's just beginning." He stepped into the sunlight. The camera crews outside turned, catching his face. No disguise, no performance. Just the man behind the myth, stepping forward not as a celebrity, but as a citizen who refused to stay silent. The truth had walked through the front door. And it wasn't leaving. But it didn't stop there. Protesters began gathering on the sidewalk, not in waves but in steady clusters. Parents, students, veterans, pastors, many holding hand-drawn signs. Some held printed photos of their repossession notices. Others brought nothing but their voices. Shaq didn't show up that day. He didn't need to. The truth was doing the work now. Inside a quiet office at his foundation's building in Midtown, he sat with Della and Julius, the air thick with quiet focus. Papers lined the table, legal documents, property transfers, paperwork bearing the new name of the dealership. Shaq held a thick black pen in his hand, signing with patience, not flourish. The dealership, every vehicle, every contract, every building was being transferred into a nonprofit trust called the Equity Mile Fund. It wasn't just a name. It was a system, designed not to profit off vulnerability, but to correct the damage caused by it. Shaq had been working on it with Della for weeks, long before Reed's downfall hit screens. "You really doing this?" Julius asked. Shaq nodded. "Every cent Holloway made goes back into the hands it came from."
Della tapped the final contract. "You know this'll take years to fully unravel."
"Good," Shaq said. "Let it." He didn't want a quick fix. He wanted slow justice. Patient, rooted, undeniable, the kind that stuck. That evening, Reed Mallory made a statement from the steps of his house, wearing a gray suit that suddenly looked too large for him. He called the allegations selective editing, and orchestrated slander, but the reporters didn't ask about edits. They asked about victim. They asked why his name was on so many forged documents, why 7 employees had come forward in the last 4 hours, with matching stories, why the DMV had already opened a formal inquiry into title laundering. His words evaporated beneath the camera's cold glare. The next morning, Shaq held a press conference in front of the Holloway Motors lot. No podium, no corporate backdrop, just him, a mic, and rows of chairs filled with the very people Reed's empire had exploited. Trevin was there, sitting quietly beside Cassandra, his eyes bright beneath the familiar green hoodie. Shaq had tracked down online. In the third row, Tasha Ellis sat with a hand on her swollen belly. Behind her stood Edra Linton, her daycare kids huddled close. Shaq didn't speak long. He didn't need to. Holloway Motors was never about cars, he said, voice steady. It was about power, and like a lot of power it stayed quiet, because people thought it couldn't be touched. But power only works when people don't talk to each other, when we don't look up. Today we're looking up. The crowd stood with him, not in applause, in understanding. He turned to the cameras. From this moment forward, every dollar that came out of pain goes back into healing. The families harmed by this dealership will receive direct reparations. The rest of the profits will go toward education, transportation programs, and legal support for low-income communities in Atlanta. He paused. And the face of this business won't be mine anymore. It'll be the people it was meant to serve. When it was over, Shaq stepped off the makeshift stage and walked the lot, now empty of staff, but full of memory. He touched the hood of a silver SUV. The same model Linnell Greer had once driven home, thinking her life had changed. It had, but not in the way she expected. That SUV had been towed a month after she lost her job, thanks to unpaid adjustments she never agreed to. Now the SUV sat under the control of the trust. Soon it would be repaired, inspected, and donated to a new owner, free of cost, full of care. Reporters followed, but Shaq didn't stop for interviews. Instead, he entered the showroom, the same place where Reed had once framed his smile alongside a wall of falsified endorsements. All the pictures were gone now. In their place was a large, simple display, a black and white photo of the families affected. No names, no spotlight, just people, survivors. The glass was still cracked from the protest. Shaq left it that way. Outside, someone began playing music, soft live saxophone, from a local jazz artist who had once lost his van in a dealer repossession tied to Reed's network. His presence wasn't planned, but it felt right. Justice, Shaq realized, didn't always shout. Sometimes it hummed. That evening, news outlets across the country ran segments with headlines like "O'Neill flips script on corrupt car dealership," "Justice drives in Holloway Motors reimagined," from exploitation to empowerment. Some leaned into the celebrity angle, others on the political side, but the truth was rooted deeper than the headlines. It wasn't about Shaq being a hero. It was about the lie being exposed. The storm didn't end overnight. Lawsuits continued. Reed's assets were frozen pending investigation. A class action suit emerged, built around Della's growing archive of evidence. State authorities launched formal probes. Banks began auditing every loan tied to Reed's financing companies. But Shaq didn't track every detail. He was back in the community, meeting with school leaders, sitting quietly in city council forums, listening more than talking. He visited Cassandra and Trevin every Sunday. They didn't need to say much. Sometimes just sitting on the steps with a glass of lemonade was enough. The ghost of injustice didn't vanish, but it had a name now, and that name no longer lived behind a dealership window. The collapse wasn't loud. It was measured, deliberate, permanent. There's a chair in Shaq's living room that no one sits in anymore. It's not roped off, not covered in plastic like your grandma used to do. It's just there, a little to the left of the couch, angled so you can still see the TV, but catch the sun when it falls through the bay window in the late afternoon. It's worn, not with age, but with memory, and every time Shaq walks past it, he glances, just briefly, not expecting anyone, just remembering who used to fill that space. His father, Philip Harrison, wasn't a big man, not like Shaq, but he had presence, the kind that made a room pay attention without saying a word. He was military, orderly, blunt, sharp with his advice, didn't care for mess, but he never raised his voice unless it was to defend his family. That man had rules, curfews, clean shoes, a firm handshake, and he lived by every one of them. Shaq never told him thank you as much as he should have. He thinks about that now, in the quiet. Across from that chair is the table where Lucille used to lay out the bills. Her hands always moved with certainty. She'd hum while balancing the checkbook, stirring sweet tea with her other hand. She taught him to keep his heart open, even when his fists itched, to speak when silence was comfortable, to forgive, not because others deserved it, but because you did. She still calls him every Sunday.
Baby, you eating enough?
I'm good, Mama. Don't I'm good, me. You sound tired. I'm not tired, just thinking. That usually means trouble's thinking back. And she's not wrong. That night, after the protests died down and the cameras disappeared, Shaq sat alone in the living room with the weight of everything he'd uncovered sitting on his chest. The dealership, the lies, the betrayal. It wasn't the first time he'd seen injustice up close, but this time it had worn his smile, used his face, borrowed his legacy to hurt people he swore to protect. He looked over at the empty chair and spoke out loud. I should have seen it sooner. The room didn't answer, but something inside him stirred. Not guilt, not anymore. Guilt was what he felt when he found out. What came next was heavier responsibility. The problem ain't the scam, he said, barely above a whisper. It's who gets believed. Because that's what it came down to, didn't it? People like Cassandra, Like Tasha. Like Edra. They told the truth. They cried. They begged. They filed complaints. But no one listened. Because their names weren't big. Their stories weren't clean. They didn't carry titles or trophies. Reed Mallory smiled smoother. Dressed better. Talked in paragraphs with polished edges. And that was enough. Shaq knew that truth. He'd seen it since the day he became a public figure. He could wear the same hoodie as a black teenager. But it hit different on him. The world smiled wider. Police hands stayed lower. Doors opened faster. And he hated that. Because it meant the world hadn't changed, just the way it responded to status. That's what Reed understood too well. He didn't just exploit the system, he exploited perception. And perception in America was often louder than fact. Shaq leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who stood in front of a cracked mirror, trying to look tough before middle school, memorizing the way his father folded his arms, the way his mother softened every stern word with a glance. That boy grew up to be a giant, but at his core he was still just trying to prove he hadn't forgotten what it meant to struggle. "You were right, Pop," he said, glancing at the chair. "Discipline matters, doing things the hard way. But you were wrong about one thing." He paused, the words catching on his breath. "Kindness ain't weakness." He pulled out a box from under the couch. Old photos, notes, cards from fans over the years. One envelope was from a girl named Rihanna, in New Orleans. He'd met her after Katrina, gave her a laptop for school. She'd sent him a letter 5 years later saying she got into Howard. "Because you told me I could." That one lived in the top of the box. He didn't open it, just touched it like a reminder. Sometimes, change wasn't about big moves. It was about showing up, being seen, being heard. The chair beside him would never be filled again. But that didn't mean it was empty. It held everything his father taught him, everything his mother gave, and everything he now had to pass forward. He stood and walked to the kitchen, fixed himself a glass of water, looked out the back window where the porch light flickered, barely hanging on. He'd have to fix that, but not tonight. Tonight, he needed the quiet, not to escape, but to understand. The world wasn't fair. He'd accepted that long ago. But that didn't mean he'd stop fighting. Because somewhere out there, another Trevin was watching. Another Cassandra was surviving. Another kid was waving from a corner, hoping somebody important would wave back. And this time, Shaq would see them. He already had. It started with a new sign. Simple. No neon. No sparkle. Just bold black letters etched into brushed metal, mounted on reclaimed wood above the entrance. It read, Lucille Motors, a name that didn't need explanation for those who understood legacy. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony. No celebrity flashbulbs. No speeches under banners. The grand reopening happened on a Tuesday morning, quiet and unannounced, the same way people rebuild trust slowly, deliberately, with more doing than talking. Shaq stood in the center of the lot as the sun rose behind the fresh coat of paint. The place still smelled faintly of rubber and rain, but the air felt lighter now, like the ghosts had made room for something honest. This wasn't just a new name. It was a new way of doing things. Gone were the hidden fees and forged signatures. The new office was run by a collective of former customers, now co-owners, trained through a community investment program. Shaq and Della, launched 3 months earlier. Mechanics who'd once been ignored, now ran the service center with transparency. Single moms who'd once fought back tears in the finance office were now helping other women navigate fair credit programs. The waiting area no longer showed photos of executives and sports figures. Instead, it displayed framed testimonials of those who'd been impacted, and then empowered. Stories of recovery, of dignity returned. Behind the front desk hung a portrait of Lucille O'Neill. Soft smile, knowing eyes. Below it, a plaque read, Kindness is power, and power must serve. Shaq didn't stand on a pedestal here. He sat on the folding chairs just like everyone else. When folks came in asking for him, they were told he was probably sweeping the sidewalk or in the break room checking emails. He didn't want to be the face. He wanted to be the foundation. He remembered what he'd said that day the truth went love. I didn't burn it down. I rebuilt it right. That still rang in his head like a promise, one made not to the world, but to the ones who'd been stepped on and silenced. It was late morning when the bell above the door jingled, and Trevin walked in. Same green hoodie. Taller now. Clean sneakers. His eyes moved across the space like he was searching for a version of it he once knew, but all he found was something new and safe, and Shaq stepped forward, not saying anything right away. He didn't need to. Trevin looked up at him, grinning. My mom said we got a place now. Shaq smiled back. You do. Cassandra had been offered a full-time position at the dealership 2 weeks earlier, part of the newly formed community financing team. She now helped design loan structures built around equity, not exploitation. Her office didn't have a door. It stayed open by choice. Trevin walked the lot, like he was claiming it. Like every corner used to carry shadows, but didn't anymore. He stopped by a silver hatchback, ran his hand across the hood, then turned to Shaq. You remember that day outside the shelter? He asked. Shaq nodded. You didn't say much. I was listening. Trevin laughed. You're good at that. Shaq tilted his head. You too. They walked together past rows of cleaned-up inventory. Every car now carried a QR code on the windshield, not for marketing, but for transparency. Scan it, and you'd get the car's full history, financing options, and the mechanic's inspection notes. No tricks, no small print. In the back lot, Julius was setting up a pop-up booth for an upcoming mini-documentary shoot. Not about Shaq. About the people. Della had helped secure a grant to fund a training series filmed on-site to teach young entrepreneurs how to run ethical businesses. Edra Linton's daycare kids painted posters for the event, one of which read in big blue letters, Our future rides here. Shaq looked over and smiled. None of this happened overnight. And it wasn't all pretty. Some people still didn't trust Lucille Motors. Others drove past it, shaking their heads, still stuck in the memory of what it used to be. But the people inside, they were changing it. And that was enough for now. In the break room, Shaq poured himself a cup of coffee. The same room Reed used to conduct hush-hush meetings now held weekly staff sessions where everyone had a voice. There were no titles, just roles. Everyone mattered. Everyone got a chair. He sat across from Tasha Ellis, who had returned from maternity leave and now ran customer service with a patience born from lived experience. Her daughter's photo sat on the table beside her reusable water bottle. She's walking now, Tasha said, beaming. Won't stop. Keeps moving. Just like her mama. Shaq nodded. She's got your fight. No, Tasha replied. She's got your faith.
You let that sit.
Because she wasn't wrong. He hadn't just wanted justice. He'd wanted to believe something better could be built from the wreckage. And now here it was. Not perfect, not finished, but honest. Later that afternoon, he stepped outside into the sun. Trevin was tossing a basketball into a portable hoop near the back wall. A mechanic named Luther had rolled it out during lunch. Shaq watched as the ball arced high, hit the backboard, and dropped through the net. You ever think about playing? He asked. Trevin shrugged. Maybe. I just like the feel of the ball. You know, how it listens when you move right. Shaq grinned. Yeah, I know. They shot around for a bit. No cameras, no audience, just rhythm and sunlight, and something healing in the simplicity of it all. Before Trevin left for the day, he stopped by Shaq's office, the one with no nameplate. Just an open door and a file cabinet full of plans. You think this place is gonna stay good? He asked. Shaq thought about it. If we keep showing up with the truth in our hands, I think it will. Trevin nodded, then walked out, hoodie bouncing with every step. Shaq looked out the window, watching the kid disappear into the glow of early evening, and thought about how far things had come. Lucille Motors wasn't just a car lot. It was a message. That when systems fail, people can rebuild them. That when trust is broken, it can be earned back. That justice doesn't always come in courtrooms. It comes in clear contracts, in handshakes that mean something, in green hoodies that still walk tall. If this story hit you in the gut or made you think twice about who we trust, don't just scroll. Stick around, because we're not done exposing the smooth talkers hiding behind good suits. Every story we tell digs deeper, hits harder, and pulls the curtain all the way back. This isn't just storytelling. It's accountability in motion. And next time, it might be your street, your name, your justice.